Welcome to Expedition Networking, a special segment of the Networking RX podcast. I'm Frank Agan, founder and president of AmSpirit Business Connections, and your host for this program. For those of you who are familiar, on the Networking RX podcast, we share information and have conversations with experts, such as authors, researchers, and social scientists. And all of these programs are aimed at helping you learn how to become better at building professional relationships and understanding why they work. In this Expedition Networking segment, however, we're going to bring on successful entrepreneurs and unique professionals and explore their networking adventure and learn how they used relationships to create lasting success. Today on Expedition Networking, we have Andrew Stotz, PhD. He is, if you need to look him up, but you don't believe me about this, you go on LinkedIn. He is the worst podcast host of my worst investment ever. And I'm just going to quickly read a couple things off his LinkedIn profile. I won't get into all of it. I nearly lost everything in 1998, but clawed my way back. Now I use that experience to help others win. I help others create, grow, measure, and protect wealth. And Andrew is, I guess, our conversation, but Andrew is a testament to this world is incredibly small. He's incredibly small. I assume you grew up in the United States, but he's over in Thailand. He's in the Bangkok metro area. Not that that means anything to anybody here in the States, but welcome to the program.
Thanks, Frank. I'm so happy to be here, and hello to everybody in the audience.
Well, I guess give us the story. This is going to be a unique story. Looking on your LinkedIn profile, I certainly see that you went to school in the States, but much of your existence, professional existence, has been in Thailand. Lots of everything.
Yeah, I once remember watching Robin Williams tell his story of his life in 2 minutes. So I'm gonna give you this story.
Okay.
I'm going to try to keep it under 2 minutes, but my father worked for DuPont. We lived in Delaware. We then moved to Ohio, and I grew up in a small town called Hudson, Ohio. By the age of 16, I had attempted suicide, and I was in rehab for drug addiction. I spent time in 3 different rehabs in Cleveland, Ohio area until I got clean in 1982. From that day to today, I haven't taken any drugs or alcohol. So that's one avenue of my life. But I was set free at 18 when I got out of high school. I moved to California and eventually, didn't have any money or anything. And then I basically got an undergrad in finance and an MBA. I worked for Pepsi, but I just had this bug that I wanted to live in Asia. And I managed to get a job teaching at a university, and I was teaching finance. And I arrived in Thailand in 1992 with $2,000 in my pocket, $20,000 of student loan debt, and everything I had in about 13 boxes. All my accounts were closed in America, and I completely left America. And I built a career in finance. I eventually went into the world of finance, became an analyst, rose to become a head of research, and became ranked as a leading analyst in Thailand, number 1 analyst for 2 years in 2008. Roughly around that time. And then I became the president of CFA Society here for Chartered Financial Analysts, which was really my proudest moment. Then I started my own business. So I do research, I teach, I have a lot of online courses, and I teach at university. And then I started a podcast, and I am now officially the worst podcast host of my worst investment ever.
And on that podcast, you bring people on and they share their worst investment and the story behind it. That's how we met. I shared my worst investment. We don't need listen to the episode. No spoilers. You have to go listen to it. So there's your story.
That's it. And I've now interviewed about 316 people. And when I think about it, I was thinking about, first of all, so far, I am the worst podcast host because there literally has been no challengers. So I really wanted to be number 1 in something.
There you go.
But I now am number 1 at the worst. And I suspect I'm not going to get any challengers to that. But, you never know. But I can say that my life, when it comes to networking, really was about being friendly and making friends. And then later with the podcast, I decided I really wanted to go a little bit deeper and farther. And as you were saying, the internet, Zoom, all these different tools that we have allow us to do this so easily. And I knew I wanted to do a podcast, and I knew I wanted to talk about finance or investment, but I couldn't figure out how to do it. And I never liked to do something that everybody else is doing. It took me a couple of years to really figure out the angle. And then I came up with this. I was walking at the park where I get most of my inspiration. I never get inspiration sitting at my desk. But I was walking at the park and I listened to a podcast. It was called My Worst Interview Ever. I listened to a few episodes and it just kind of disappeared. So I sent a message to the guy and I said, look, I think I may borrow your idea and replace interview with investment. And then that's the origin story of what happened. And then I sent out an email to people that I knew, and I said, would you be willing to tell me a story of your worst investment? And, email response rates are very low these days, but I got 500 written stories of loss. And I thought, holy, there's something here. And what I realized, of course, when you talk about my worst investment ever, everybody's got one. We talk normally about finance, but we could be talking about, about time, about relationships. And that allowed me to move to the next stage, which is to build a wider network of people, get to know them, and listen to their stories. And of course, what we learned from, how to win friends and influence people and that type of thing, it's about taking a sincere interest in other people and letting them tell their story. So that is kind of where I got to as of now. And then I would say my goal for 2021 is to go deeper with a small number of those people plus some others to be able to say, I'm really, I believe with the crisis and the shutdowns and economies and the suffering that's going on in this world, I think that deeper, closer relationships become even more valuable, not only for business, but just for survival and happiness.
Now, it sounds to me that I guess what I was trying to do is draw a comparison between business relationships in Asia and the United States, but it almost sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, when you left the States, you really had never discovered relationships as you know them now. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I would say, it's a little bit like my getting clean and sober at the age of 17. I basically never had a legal drink in my life.
Oh,
And
interesting.
I
Yeah.
think it's kind of the same thing in that I never really was in the scene in LA building relationships. When I worked at Pepsi in the factories in manufacturing, I was studying my MBA at night. And then I basically got on a plane after 3 years of working in Los Angeles to come to Thailand. So I think, you can now say I've lived longer in Thailand than I lived in the US, number one, and because it's now almost 30 years. And the other thing you can say is that my whole business career has been completely developed in Thailand. And it's very different, the way people connect here. Now, in 1995, my best friend came to see me. We grew up in Ohio together, in Hudson, Ohio, between Akron and Cleveland. And he said, let's start a coffee business. And that was the beginning of what is now called Coffee Works, which is our factory in Thailand. And we're a business-to-business coffee roaster. And so that business we've grown over the years. He's always run that. We're equal investors, but I've been, working in the investment banking side. So we built that business, but, my whole career has been built here. And I can say Thai people and Thai culture has taught me some really fascinating lessons. And those are lessons about relationships and what people value. And you realize it can be very different by culture. That's fascinating. When I was in Germany visiting some clients, as I used to travel a lot more to visit clients, it was, we had a meeting at 4, and at 5 p.m. they said, okay, bye. And then everybody got up out of the office and they went home. And it's like they take it really seriously that, 5 p.m. or whatever time that was, it's time to go home and be with your family. And Thai people are not necessarily like that, but you just realize that, there's a culture behind, every country, and there's a work culture that, it's just different.
Interesting. And obviously that's not like that in the States. It's as we record this, it's 5:16 p.m. Eastern Standard Time and 5:16 a.m. where Andrew's sitting, um, whatever time zone that is.
Yeah, in
And
beautiful Bangkok. Well, and I'm an early bird, so I love to get up early, and the birds are singing outside, and so I don't mind that.
well, as we said before we hit record, is that COVID and Zoom has really shrunk the world down to nothing. The only problem it hasn't solved is the problem of time, and that we as humans, need to get sleep and need to have our personal lives as well. So that kind of restricts the overlap in certain time zones. But we made it work. We made it work before. We made this work as well. And now, growing up, what did you want to be?
I mean, when I got sober, it was it was already a hard road for me and my family, and so really, just graduating high school was really an accomplishment, and I literally was in rehab for my senior year in high school, so I didn't even really attend. I did homeschooling from the rehab. But just to get out of school and get a job was enough at that time. I didn't have any money, and my parents said, "We spent all of the money for your university, for your college on rehab, so we don't have an ability to put you through university." So I just didn't have the idea that I would even go to university. I just thought I'd work in a factory and I'd do different jobs. So that was it. And I didn't have much money. I lived on my own in Kent, near Kent State in Ohio. And but I do remember one thing, and that is that I had a close knit group of friends who we had used drugs together and other things, and we all got pretty much sober together. And
Hmm.
I had the chance to really every day after work spend time with them, talking about positive things. I had no money, but I just was so happy, and I realized, and I learned a lesson from that I've carried all my life, and that lesson is simply that money is neutral, right? It can sometimes be great, it can sometimes be terrible, but you can be happy with no money. It's not fun sometimes to have no money, obviously, but it's relationships that really are it. And when I say in my LinkedIn profile that I nearly lost everything in 1998, uh, I can maybe tell that story and how the experience when I was 18,
Please.
really came back. But basically, I'd had a pretty successful career, and I'd arrived in Thailand in 1992. By 1995, I was head of research at the leading foreign broker in Thailand. And then, I had some ups and downs, but eventually what happened, we had started Coffee Works, we built a factory, it was funded by us. And then, things were going pretty well. We had big dreams, but, we didn't have much revenue at the time. And then my career was shooting to the moon. It was great. And then all of a sudden, the 1997 crisis happened in Asia. In fact, it's centered in Thailand. And basically, it started in 1997. By 1998, the baht, the currency of Thailand, had depreciated by 50%, and the economy had contracted by 11%. So, that was a very severe crisis, and I lost my job, and our revenue went to almost zero. And basically, Dale and I had to move into the factory, which you can imagine being almost at the outskirts of a jungle outside of Bangkok. And we were living in one room, which was our accounting room, and we just put in two beds in it because, it was just like going back to university practically. And
Hmm.
that's what we did, and we basically hunkered down. And I've learned in life that there's times, there's rounds in our life where your objective really is just not to get knocked out. And so that it's just the objective is cover up, don't get knocked out. And that's why we moved to the factory to cut all of our costs. And then basically in the summer of 1998, in August, when everything really was at its darkest, I got a call. It was a Sunday morning. It was a rainy day. If you could just imagine the darkness, the gloominess, the smell of heavy rain in a tropical area. And basically, Dale and I were sitting there on each of our beds, just looking at each other, talking. And my sister called from America, and she said that her cancer had come back.
Mm.
And she said the doctor said she would only live for another month. So would I please come home? And so yeah, I hung up that phone and I just cried. And Dale and I both cried. And we were basically not only losing my career, we were losing our business, and now I was losing my sister. And I went home to be with her. And after 1 week of being with her, she passed and left three beautiful girls. I stayed there for about a month with them, and then I came back to Thailand very depressed and really felt like I had almost lost it all. And so that really was my professional bottom. And we slowly came out of it. And I think that one of the lessons I learned is sometimes you have to just take the next right step, but it's not going to bring you any success right now.
Right.
And that's just, there's times in life where you just got to just kind of creep forward, and with no reward.
Yeah, I mean, Hollywood is fun. They have fun endings, but Hollywood endings rarely happen in life, if at all. I don't, um,
Yeah, and if you think about networking, you know, we were kind of crazy because we came to Thailand with really no relationships. And, quickly built a lot of friends, but I wouldn't say that. I think Dale and I are both type of people. I don't know whether it's our families or whatever, that we don't want to ask other people for help. I just don't want to ask I can do it myself. I don't want to bother other people. It's not their problem. Why should I ask? And I'll tell you a story about a friend of mine here in Thailand. He was a senior minister and a very good friend, and I got to know him as I was, doing my job. And I had a friend of mine, another American guy, that his son called me, and he said, "Hey, my dad got arrested, and he told me to call you." And I said, "All right, where is he?" And he told me the jail that he was being held in, and so I went down there at lunch break to see him, asked him what happened, and it wasn't something that I think was that serious, but the police were getting pretty tough on this particular thing. So I told him, let me call my connection, this guy, this senior minister guy, and basically he called the police station on behalf of my friend to find out what was happening, investigate, get some background, and then he called me and told me about that, and he just said, I've made a pitch that he should be able to get bail and get out and defend himself in this particular case, which eventually he did. But I asked a friend of mine, a Thai friend of mine, why did he do that? Why does he have to mess up, get his name messed up in that? And she said to me, he spent all of his life building his personal power, his personal network, his personal relationships. He wants to use it, and he wants to show, that there's power in that. And that's a lesson that I learned in Thailand, is that, relationships and connections are very critical, very critical into how things get done. And, sometimes obviously there can be corrupt relationships, but there's also just, Thais in Asia have a very different way of viewing it, in the sense that, for instance, high school friendships are, you become part of that group, and that group stays together. And then the group that you studied with at university, they stay together throughout the rest of their life. And, that is a very different way. I mean, whereas I think after high school, everybody just goes their own way in America.
Yeah.
And they build these communities, these groups, out of that. And I learned a lot from that. And I have built, relationships through that. That's a big lesson that I've learned in Asia and also in Thailand. Number one, about influence and personal power that you develop over time. And recently I've had a young person come to me with a problem that he was facing, and he asked me if I could help with that problem. And I said, no problem, let me make a few phone calls. And I made a few phone calls, and problem, can get solved. I know exactly who to talk to. And, he felt really bad, and he said, look, I really don't want to bother you. And I was like, it's not a bother,
Yeah.
I'm happy to help. And so I think that's also a lesson in networking, is that ask. I didn't ask for many, many years, and I toughed it out. But now I've definitely learned more about asking, and that people do want to help.
Yeah, I think that's a great lesson, that people do want to help. And I could never really put my finger on it entirely until you told the story about your friend who helped the individuals having criminal problems. And that it was, I don't want to say flaunting power, but just, what, I've risen to this. I have the ability. I want to flex this muscle. And not in a braggadocious way, but just in God's given me this ability. I want to do something with it, kind of a way.
Yeah, and I think, one of the things that we get so caught up in ourselves, particularly during crisis times, that we forget, about other people's suffering. And I was teaching a class at university after work, and I had driven down to the university, and it's in the old part of Bangkok, right near the Grand Palace. And I finished my class at about 9, and it was 9:30 or something like that. And I was driving out of the Grand Palace area in Bangkok, and there was a woman who was I believe was pregnant. I can't remember. It was a long time ago, and she just kind of waved me down, and I pulled over, and she said, I need to go to the hospital," which she said to me in Thai. And I said, "Okay, get in." And then which hospital? And I was starting to drive, and then what she was struggling and suffering, and there's just lots going on in her head, and I could just see that it's just like life was overwhelming her, and I managed to get her to a hospital, which she really appreciated, and she got into that hospital. But it was just interesting that I didn't really know what was going on with her, whether it was something mental or emotional or physical. I mean, there wasn't a physical injury that I could see. But when I drove home after dropping her off, I realized, we're all crushed at times by the weight of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not my place to judge what is crushing to another person. We all are crushed by different things in different degrees, and it's not my place to say, "Oh, that shouldn't crush you." The fact is that we all are crushed by the weight of the world sometimes, and for me, it was really the problem with drugs and alcohol. And when I got into treatment, and my parents got me in the hands of good people who really, some voluntarily, some, were paid to work in that job, but they really did commit their time and energy to help me at the time. And I just want to use that as a reminder to all of us, particularly during this difficult time, that everybody's suffering in one way or another. And sometimes just listening, just being there, just picking someone up and dropping them off somewhere is something that really makes a difference in a person's life.
Yeah, no, totally agree. Let's switch gears here to kind of wrap up. Let's talk about your business. People obviously in the States, how could they help you? You have courses. I know that you're a proficient investor, consultant to companies, but you also help individuals understand a lot of those things as well.
So one of the things I did, knowing that we had the COVID situation coming, is that I focused a lot of my attention on my online courses. And so I've been teaching these courses for years, so I really wanted to upgrade them. So I have a place called Stotz Academy, which I think the best way for people to connect with me is just to go to My Worst Investment Ever. And then there you'll see everything. But at Stotz Academy, basically I have courses that help people do a few things. Number one, I have courses that help people create value. And that is what I call Finance Made Ridiculously Simple, which is about how to read financial statements and then how to make your company financially world class. So that's about creating value. The second thing is about growing value. And I have a course that I wrote for my sister who passed away, her daughters, and my other nieces. I wrote a course for them about how to start building your wealth investing in the stock market. And that's a course and a book. And that's how beginners can really look at the stock market, understand the core principles, and build their wealth over time. And then I have so I help people create, grow, and measure value. And the final one is what's called the Valuation Masterclass. It's the boot camp for valuation. It's about almost 200 hours of work, and students will value about 20 companies. But for young people like myself, when I came to Thailand, who really want to learn how to build a career in finance and valuation, the Valuation Masterclass is for them. And so those are my courses. And I love sharing what I've got, and I've got Facebook communities for each one of those for the students that are going through them.
Okay, great. And you said the best way to contact you is through the website myworstinvestmentever.com.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well,
and
Andrew,
if you go to, by the way, if someone goes to the About page, send a message to me. It comes directly to me. So
okay. I really appreciate your time today. I have to admit, I'm I don't want to say pleasantly surprised, totally fascinated totally blew me away. I didn't think I was going to be getting half of what I got, but thank you very much. I really appreciate it. If I can ever help you, let me know.
Well, I appreciate you too, and you've opened up my eyes to networking more, and so I'm listening to your podcast and I'm learning from you. So let's all keep learning about how we really get the most out of network, not only for business, but also for the support, the emotional support that we often need during tough times. So thank you.
To wrap things up, remember, we're looking for some enterprising business types to join our team as franchisees of AmSpirit Business Connections. Our franchisees work with entrepreneurs, sales representatives, and professionals in their area to help them become more successful through networking and the exchange of quality business referrals in a structured weekly morning meeting. This is a unique franchise opportunity, you see, because these meetings are in the morning. A successful business type or professional can add this franchise opportunity onto what they're already doing. Again, all of our franchisees do something else. For a couple hours in the morning, a few mornings a week, these franchisees work the AmSpirit Business Connections model. The rest of the time, they're attorneys, accountants, realtors, coaches, and consultants of various kinds. The wonderful thing is that not only do our franchisees realize a financial gain from operating the AmSpirit Business Connections model, but the business networks that they build and develop become a great source of referrals for their primary business as well. Perhaps you know someone, perhaps you are that someone. Whatever the case, to learn more about the AmSpirit Business Connections franchise opportunity, please contact me using the email in the show notes or the one we provide at the end of this program.
Thanks for joining us on the Networking RX podcast. Please put what you've learned into action today and let us know if you have questions, comments, or ideas for future topics. You can email them to us at podcast@amspirit.com. That's AmSpirit.com. Finally, so you never miss an episode, be sure to subscribe to the Networking RX podcast through iTunes, Overcast, or however you receive your podcasts. Now get out and network with someone.
The Networking RX podcast is the copyright production of AmSpirit Business Connection. All rights reserved.